Dr. K's research. What has Dr. K been up to lately? I asked C, who works as an assistant to Dr. K, one day. Not much. Why? Why what? What has he been researching lately? He has already stopped. Why did he stop? To put it bluntly, it was a joke. Since people wouldn't eat it, what can we do? Eat? Well, you see, who would eat feces? Feces? Weren't you at the tasting event? Tasting event? C's response left me with more questions. If you didn't even know about the tasting event, then you mustn't have heard everything. So listen without laughing. With this preface, C recounted the story of Dr. K's research, from its success to its failure. Was he Malthus? Anyway, there was someone who said, while population increases geometrically, food supply only increases arithmetically. Dr. K's research was based on this principle. One day during summer, as Dr. K was reading a book, I sat beside him lost in my own thoughts. Suddenly he looked up and said, "C, fetch me some feces." Ridiculous. How could anyone understand what he meant by that? So I asked if he meant feces, and he replied asking if there was any other kind of shit. Then I figured he might need it to examine someone, although he's not a medical doctor. Whose feces do you need? So, with a grunt, he demanded that I fetch anyone's feces. It was all so chaotic that I just stayed still. Well, even if I'm not a doctor, if there's enough to examine, shouldn't I point out whose it is? Thus, I was just staring at Dr. K's face, and he was just sitting there without saying a word. Heh, I thought he had forgotten, so I tried to sit back down. "Did you get it?" he asked as he stood up. Well, seeing him so determined, it was no joke. I had no choice but to go to the restroom and scoop up something smelly and present it to the doctor. He glanced at it briefly and then got angry again, saying I only brought too little. I felt a little embarrassed. So I had to go back and scoop up a bowlful this time. Well, that seemed to satisfy him, as he smiled as he rolled up his lab coat sleeve, then gestured for me to come along to the lab with him. As you know, I have little knowledge in the field of science. Since I was just the assistant to the doctor, I followed along whether I understood or not. The doctor took the feces, examined it under the microscope, boiled it in test tubes, washed it, broke it down with electricity, and tried all sorts of things, but still couldn't get it right. He starved himself until evening and stayed up all night with it. No matter how much ventilation devices we had, the smell was unbearable. My nose was itched and my eyes were burning. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I quietly slipped away to get some rest. It was around 2 a.m. when he called me again. So when I went to check on him, he asked again, "Is this new feces or old feces?" How would I know? I just fetched it from the toilet. How could I tell if it's new or old feces? So I said I didn't know. Looks like old stuff. It's all rotten. Definitely old. He muttered to himself for a moment and then asked me to get some fresh feces. Well, I'm not exactly the most patient person, so I grumbled that I didn't feel like it. But then Dr. K, with a troubled look, glanced at me and said, "I don't feel like it either." He took the bowl and went to the other room. Funny how someone who didn't feel like it ended up fetching a whole bowlful. I was amused, but also a little angry at the same time, as I couldn't sleep. I almost said, "I guess you'll have plenty to eat staying up all night," but seeing Dr. K looking so serious, I just couldn't bring myself to do so. So I said, "I'll go to bed first," and went to my room to sleep. From the next day onwards, Dr. K was practically glued to the lab. It was rather pitiful to see him even eating in that smelly room. The way he sweated profusely while tinkering with dirty objects was both amusing and, in a way, admirable. Considering that Dr. K had lived a luxurious life, never experienced any hardship or filth, it was surprising to see him frowning over his research, eating in a smelly room, and losing sleep at night. His demeanor seemed solemn and worthy of respect. Several months passed in this manner. I didn't know what he's doing exactly, but it seems he's analyzing the feces to extract some active ingredients. Since old feces is deemed unusable, from then on, even the household servants' feces ended up in bowls and were brought into Dr. K's lab. So, the toilet was always filled with nothing but urine. As for the household members, there were Dr. K, myself, 3 servants, a concubine, a maid, and 2 servant boys. Sometimes the output of these 9 people wasn't enough. During such times, Dr. K would occasionally show signs of envy towards families with 20 or 30 members, lamenting the lack of research materials. Seeing him regretful due to the shortage of resources made me feel that I wished I could somehow produce a few more bowls if possible. During such times, I could see a hint of envy in the doctor's eyes as he lamented the lack of research materials and paced around. It made me feel too guilty, and I wished I could help make a few batches if possible. Meanwhile, my grandmother, who lived in the countryside, passed away, so I went down there for about a month. It was only in the fall that I returned. Soon after arriving at the doctor's house and unpacking, I asked Bokdong, the servant boy, where the doctor was. He was indeed in his laboratory, so I went in to greet him. He was having something to eat, and despite the strong smell, he warmly invited me to join him. It had been a while, and the odor was quite intense. The doctor had a small desk set up in one corner of the laboratory where he was having lunch, so I grabbed a chair and went over there as he had called me. Even the lunch resembled rice cakes, but the taste was something I had never experienced before, almost like rice made with a little bit of meat broth. So perhaps out of curiosity, I dipped a couple of dumplings in salt and tasted them. "Is it good?" he asked. When I replied that it was okay, "You probably wouldn't even know if it had feces in it." He chuckled. "Huh?" Come to think of it, I did notice a slight smell, but I figured it was just the room's air and continued eating as if nothing had happened. But upon hearing the doctor's words, I felt a sudden rush of saliva under my tongue, and before I knew it, I was nauseous. I tried to get up to head to the bathroom, but then I abruptly vomited right there. "Why are you doing this? What's wrong? Hey, Bokdong, Sunam!" the doctor exclaimed as he got up and tried to hold me down on the sofa. Feeling disgusted and angry, I pushed the doctor away and demanded to know what exactly I had eaten. The clueless doctor, for the first time, seemed to grasp the cause of my vomiting. "What did you eat?" "Oh, that? Did you vomit because of that? I thought it was motion sickness again." "It's pure nutrients." Ha! The doctor laughed. He doesn't know how to laugh when he should, but he's a good laughter when he shouldn't be. It's a state-of-the-art food made of pure carbohydrates, protein, fat, and etc. The ingredients are... That's right. As you know, those... I didn't even bother to listen to the rest of his sentence and vomited again as I got up, feeling a mix of embarrassment and anger, right into his face. He seemed startled. "Ah, what the... Hey, Sunam. Bokdong." At that moment, I felt the urge to punch the doctor in the face, but I held back and returned to my room, wrapped myself in a blanket, and lay down. For the next 3 days, I couldn't eat a single meal and suffered. Well, how could one eat after such an incident? It seems that whatever enters my stomach stays only momentarily before coming back up through my mouth. It feels like the smell lingers no matter what I eat. The doctor, feeling sorry, continuously nurses me, even giving me antiemetic medication. He explains that it's just refined nutrients extracted and purified, so there shouldn't be any discomfort. Now that I think about it, I feel sorry too. He didn't maliciously feed it to me, and he even ate it himself before giving it to me. Essentially, there's nothing wrong with it. It's probably much cleaner than most restaurant food, made with the power of science. It's just that it doesn't agree with my stomach. Seeing the doctor feeling so apologetic about it, I can't help but feel sorry myself. So, on the third day, I finally woke up. It's not that the food is dirty, it just doesn't agree with my stomach. If I change my mindset, I should be fine. With that thought in mind, I reluctantly started eating the food I didn't like and began visiting the lab. At first, it was really tough. The doctor always eats his homemade lunch, and just seeing it makes my stomach churn. Even though he eats it, he still feels sorry, saying, "How's this?" Ha ha ha, as he eats. Even amidst all this, the doctor continues his experiments. Every time he adds some additional seasoning, after tasting it himself, he insists that the servant boys, not me, should try it. Kids were in a thank-you-for-nothing state, but they didn't have another option. They reluctantly obey, their faces scrunching up in discomfort as they follow their master's orders. They barely put it in their mouths, let alone swallow it, saying, "I like it better than the last one." Poor kids. The honest doctor, Kay, would reward them each with 50 jians as compensation, calling it an appraisal fee. According to Dr. K's explanation, Feces mainly consist of undigested nutrients such as fiber, tissue fragments, and various substances like mucus secreted in the intestines, along with metabolic waste products like scatol, indole, and fatty acids, as well as substantial amounts of undigested proteins, starches, and fats. These undigested nutrients typically range from 30 to 70% and are simply excreted through the anus without being absorbed. And the nutrients that simply remain in the feces rot away wastefully without anyone paying attention. But if there were a way to extract them, it could be seen as a great gospel for humanity threatened by food problems. So, he researched and discovered such a method. In other words, just like the complete combustion of coal, it is a success to plan for the complete digestion of nutrients. That is to say, analyzing the feces to extract the remaining 30% to 70% of nutrients and suggesting to eat them again. So, among the 3 meals people typically eat each day, if one meal consists of this new food, the global food supply would increase by more than 30%, wouldn't it? Even if the Earth's population were to increase by about 30%, roughly an additional 50 million people, with Dr. K's research coming true, there would be no worries. Malthus didn't anticipate such a genius emerging after his time, so he worried about such matters. While all that was going on, research on seasoning wouldn't have stopped. I only tried it once without knowing, and afterwards, I never touched it again, nor did Dr. K ever suggest it to me, so I didn't know, but eventually it smelled quite good, almost like beef soup. The smell alone made my mouth water. With that much progress, the only thing left is the presentation process. Dr. K insisted on publishing the invention process in the newspaper before holding a tasting event. I strongly objected to that. Although I haven't tasted it myself, I can guess that it tastes good. So we should first let people taste the delicious thing and then announce its ingredients. If we announce the ingredients first, I doubt anyone will show up for the tasting event. That's right. So when I objected, Dr. K seemed to agree with my opinion. Then, after discussing with Dr. K, we decided to name the invention after his name, calling it the XX bread, and Dr. K drafted a declaration for this XX bread. I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like this. When the infamous M. Sanger emerged advocating birth control, some conservatives frowned upon it, but there was substantial evidence supporting her argument. As hygiene awareness increases, the mortality rate among humans decreases. However, since the Earth's size isn't expanding, there are 3 paths for humanity. One is to regress to the past, eliminate hygiene, engage in warfare to reduce the population. The other is to limit human births, and the third is to discover new sources of food that haven't been explored yet. Madame Sanger lacked the courage to advocate for the elimination of existing lives. She also lacked the genius to discover new resources. Instead, she discovered a traditional contraceptive method, which is the birth control theory. However, I, with creativity and inventiveness, would not be satisfied with such conventional measures, and it is from here that our research begins. In the daily excrement of individuals, there remains a significant amount of nutrients, roughly 30 to 70%, averaging about 50%. These nutrients, which go to waste in the soil, are a potential source of sustenance. There are further details and numerical analyses regarding excrement, but they are omitted here. There is no need to let this go to waste. If it can be utilized, it is only justifiable to bring it to the table of humanity, making it the most righteous act of individuals. If we delve into the roots of various conventional issues arising in every aspect, it can be attributed to the terrifying anticipation of food shortages in humanity. When human life becomes abundant, all problems and their underlying causes will naturally disappear. It is from here that our research begins, and let's omit the process of research as well. In light of these motivations, I present to your table this XX bread that has arisen from this path, and I hope for high praise, blah, blah, blah. He had sent it to the printing house to be printed boldly. Then, taking advantage of Christmas, Dr. K decided to host a tasting event at his house and sent invitations to everyone. In those invitations, there was no mention of the ingredients or the motivation behind the XX bread. From a day before Christmas, things got quite busy. Since it was winter, there was no concern about the nutrients in the feces decaying, so I asked the cleanup guy to buy 10 barrels. And during the analysis and processing of it, for 3 days, Dr. K, myself, the 2 servants, and the 2 temporary assistants all lived in the midst of feces. It's unbearable how dirty it is. Yuck! Just thinking about it makes me shiver. Dr. K seems to feel sorry too. Even though no one asked him to, he made a reservation at the finest restaurant in the city and treated everyone to dinner. On the night before Christmas, we worked until late preparing everything, and the next morning, we were busy cleaning the house. Honestly, every room was filled with the smell of feces. After that intense stench, it's hard to shake it off. Of course, after futile attempts to cleanse with chemical agents, we ended up spraying perfume all over the house to mask the smell. Around 1 p.m., the guests arrived. Dr. K, usually reserved and antisocial, seemed unusually lively, bustling around, smiling incessantly, and looking for Bokdong and Sunam while scolding the assistants in a flustered manner. After gathering nearly all of the invited 50 gentlemen and ladies, the restaurant opened its doors at 2 p.m. After Dr. K's explanation, the tasting event began with the toast from W, the editor-in-chief of iNewspaper. However, as soon as it started, a journalist approached Dr. K. Dr. K, yes? There seems to be an unpleasant smell coming from this sex bread. What? The change in Dr. K's expression on his face at that moment is something I will never forget. His face suddenly turned pale, morphing into something between a smile and a grimace. Then he let out a strange sigh and quickly stood up, heading back to his laboratory. I tried to follow him, but he turned back, grabbed my arm, and whispered something in my ear. It was a soft whisper, almost inaudible, but not quite. In that whisper, he said, "Oh no, there's trouble. There was no reaction from the scatola or indole, right?" I don't know what indole or scatoli is. I just do as the doctor instructs. Besides, I wouldn't even know if there was a reaction. Still, seeing the expression on his face, I couldn't just say I didn't know. So I replied, "There definitely wasn't." And yet, he looked so sorry and kept saying, "This is bad, really bad." Dr. K muttered, at a loss for what to do. "Oh, what's there to worry about, Professor? Everyone seems to be enjoying the food. Matter of fact, someone had asked that question, but everyone else seemed to be relishing their meal." Upon hearing my words and observing the quantity being consumed, Dr. K seemed to relax a bit and breathed out. There was no reaction, for sure. Absolutely none. "Hey, see, could you pass around the statement?" he said. That was the problem. While everyone was enjoying their meal, whether it would be okay once they realized they were consuming feces was uncertain. Nonetheless, we couldn't just ignore it, so we had it printed and handed it out. Some people pocketed it, others left it on the table, and some even read it. I slipped away quietly to another room. Despite the commotion, I couldn't shake off the unease, so I listened intently and heard a rumbling sound. Curious, I rushed over to find 2 ladies and a gentleman covering their mouths with napkins, retching. Some were dashing towards the restrooms, while others, unaware of the situation, were requesting medical assistance for what they thought was food poisoning. Meanwhile, Dr. K stood in a corner of the room, his expression filled with dismay. What a debacle. It was embarrassing. So I went to Dr. K and asked, "What's going on?" Dr. K was trembling, muttering to himself, "This is a disaster. It's embarrassing. It's a big problem. Hey, Sunam." Then he fled to the other side of the room in a hurry. What could I do? Still, I had secretly prepared an emetic just in case something like this happened. So I quickly brought it out and instructed my assistants, Sunam and the other servant boy, to take care of the patients with the help of a few doctors who were invited. Dr. K apologized and explained that he wasn't feeling well and couldn't continue the event, so we had to send the guests home. And just like that, the tasting event came to an abrupt end. Later, I went to Dr. K's bedroom and found him running a fever and muttering nonsense. I felt sorry for him, and he looked pitiful as well. So I brought some ice to cool down Dr. K's head and nursed him for a while until he regained his senses. Then he started lamenting about the embarrassment and the debacle, sounding quite flustered. After a while of absent-mindedly staring in one direction, he turned to me and said, "Dear me, see, what shall we do? This is a disaster. Where could such a debacle happen?" I didn't know what to reply. "What should we do?" I responded, but it felt quite awkward. Inviting the cream of society and serving them something so awful, what a disaster it turned out to be. The doctor, who had never thought it would come to this, and neither had I, was taken aback. Well, I had a hunch that something like this might happen, but seeing the doctor so worried, I was unexpectedly frightened too. I had only regarded the potential victims individually, not collectively as a society. So now, having fed the elite of society with excrement, could there be no trouble? Meanwhile, reporters came repeatedly and phone calls flooded in, all of which Bokdong dutifully rejected. After spending the entire afternoon and night in discussion, the doctor and I decided to hide in a rural area for a month or two until the trouble died down. We settled on the doctor's acquaintance's house in T County, which had several hundred acres of land. The next morning, we hopped on the first train headed there. However, contrary to our expectations, there wasn't much buzz in the newspapers. There was just a small article under the miscellaneous section titled XX Bread Tasting Event, with no mention of the sensational event or the ingredients of XX bread. The newspaper must have been embarrassed too. As we waited for a car to T County at K Station, staying overnight at an inn, we finally saw the newspaper article the next morning. Upon reading it, the doctor chuckled for the first time, seeming relieved. Suddenly, he suggested we abandon our plan for T County and head to Y Hot Springs nearby. I couldn't object. We went there. Even at the hot springs, the doctor couldn't stop talking about it. See, there was definitely no reaction, right? Or was there a little? Why did they vomit? Mr. C, there was definitely no reaction, right? It seems like there might have been. I don't know if there was a reaction or not, but it's natural to vomit, even if there wasn't, I said. Mr. C, the doctor always developed a phobia at such times, but when he did, my temper couldn't remain calm either. Who eats feces and doesn't get sick? Feces? Then he stood up, pacing back and forth with a heavy sigh. Then suddenly, you're misunderstanding, my friend. Through the power of science, all impurities have been eliminated from it. Why do you refer to it as excrement? Totally misunderstood. Then, without reason, he burst into laughter again. Sir, that's not the case. Even if it's analyzed and determined to be something else, why didn't they vomit after eating something made from feces? The world doesn't always follow rules. Rules? You're misunderstanding, my friend. It's not like that. Then why did they vomit? Well, there was no reaction, or maybe there was. The simple-minded doctor still believes the reason guests felt nauseous was because there might have been some lingering scent of feces due to insufficient cleaning of the specimens. It's like the Koreans describe love as hopeless longing. But the relationship between Dr. K and the XX bread is truly a hopeless case. He sits there, lost in thought, suddenly sighing at the thought of the possibility of residual feces. Even when he's sleeping, he abruptly wakes up, feeling that the cleaning wasn't thorough enough. I feel so sorry and embarrassed watching him. Sir, let's forget about that now, which he responds, how can I forget? Letting out another sigh. It's so awkward. Actually, isn't this a valuable discovery? Extracting 50% of valuable nutrients from waste materials that would otherwise decompose wastefully underground without anyone noticing. How significant is this for humanity's economy? Due to our prejudices, we may not appreciate it. But if someone secretly refines the raw materials and mass produces them, what a huge contribution it would be to humanity. So one day during dinner, I asked Dr. K how about presenting that rice cake to the academic community in Germany, the land of scholars. He didn't respond, and I forgot about it. But it seems Dr. K didn't forget. That night, I woke up feeling parched and reached for some water, but it seemed Dr. K hadn't slept at all. Germany was wrong too, he muttered. I was half asleep and didn't quite understand what he meant, so I just nodded and drank some water before lying down again. XX bread isn't amusing to Germans either, he added, releasing another sigh. Hearing this, any trace of drowsiness vanished instantly. Despite feeling awkward as usual, I couldn't help but wonder why Dr. K was up at night pondering these things. Tears welled up in my eyes at the thought. So I asked him why. Germany has already succeeded in researching food from the air, so this wouldn't cause much of a sensation, he sighed again. I had nothing to say, so I simply muttered, I suppose so, feeling heavy-hearted, and he called me again. C, are you asleep? Pardon? Aren't you sleeping? No. What about Japan? It's a narrow country with many people. Please, let's not talk about it. Aren't they sort of neat freaks? They use kuso kurae, eat shit, as an insult. It's out of the question. Still, don't they gulp down dirty bathwater? Well, even so, they don't eat XX bread. Don't eat it. They don't eat it. Dr. K sighed again. Sir, how about presenting it in the United States? Do you think those Americans will eat it? They might not eat it, but they're the type to dive headfirst into anything novel or scientific, so they might find it intriguing. As we exchanged such words without reaching any resolution, we eventually fell asleep without any progress. After staying in the hot spring for about a month, Dr. K's obsession with the XX bread showed no signs of diminishing at all. That relentless fixation, even after about a month, there was no improvement. Eventually, we decided to return. We set off from Anjo to K Station, and once we arrived, we discussed the idea of visiting T County as well. So we headed to T County. It was early February, bitterly cold, as we endured a 2-hour car ride to T County. By the time we arrived, I felt completely disoriented. I couldn't see clearly, my legs felt stiff, my nose felt frozen, and it seemed like the circulation in my body had stopped. We finally got out of the car and made our way to the home of Dr. K's acquaintance, who was the landlord there. Feeling disoriented, we stumbled inside, and to our relief, we were warmly welcomed. They ushered us into the main room, while they retreated to another room. We entered and promptly made ourselves comfortable, lying down without delay. After resting for a couple of hours, we began to regain our senses. Dr. K, too, seemed to finally wake up and, with a groggy demeanor, suggested we go out and inspect the land. After washing up and getting dressed, we called the acquaintance's son to accompany us as we prepared to leave the house. Suddenly, a dog came bounding out of the shed, barking loudly. It appeared to have been eating feces, as its mouth was smeared with filth, and it followed us with its dirty mouth wide open. The landlord's son tried to chase the dog away, scolding it, but when I jokingly remarked that the dog might have also eaten some of the XX bread, Dr. K furrowed his brow deeply and exclaimed, "Oh, disgusting." "See, it's different from the lab. Get out of here, you dog," as he hurriedly made his way out, trying to avoid the dog. It was truly a hilarious sight. Dr. K's property was quite large, spanning over 200 acres, but it was hard to discern where the boundaries lay amidst the vast expanse of barren land. After exploring the area and returning to the acquaintance's house, it was already dinner time, and we were welcomed with a hearty meal. Just as I was feeling hungry, I eagerly grabbed the bowl and started eating, especially enjoying the dog meat that was served, a delicacy I had missed during our month-long stay at the Japanese inn. Dr. K seemed to be enjoying the meal as well. However, after a while, Dr. K paused and said, "See. Yes, what is it? Even in such a remote place, it seems we're still slaughtering cows. The meat is surprisingly tender for beef. Are you referring to the dog meat? The dog?" "Yes, the one that was barking earlier. Didn't you see it when we returned? The one that was, eating feces?" "Yes, that one." Dr. K suddenly dropped his chopsticks and turned pale. After a moment of silence, he quickly moved to the other side and sat down, taking a few deep breaths before suddenly retching. "Why did you do that?" I stopped eating too and approached the doctor to assist him with wiping his back. He remained still, emitting vomiting sounds repeatedly. After wiping for about 10 minutes, he seemed to calm down a bit. "This won't do. We should clean this up without the host knowing," he said as he took the cloth and wiped it himself and put it aside. I took it and threw it outside. When I came back in, the doctor said, Oh, my stomach hurts. Hey, Sunam, hey, clear the table." He then lowered his pillow and lay down, exhausted. After clearing the table, the acquaintance came in with a light, but the doctor, lying on his side, pretended not to notice, looking uncomfortable. I said he seemed tired and asked the acquaintance to leave and then lay down, lowering my pillow and lay down too, soon drifting off to sleep. After a while, the doctor, still lying on his side, called out to me. "See," he said. So I replied, "Yes." "Dogs and pigs, which one do you think is dirtier?" "Well, I suppose pigs are dirtier." "Is that so? They're probably the same. Both dogs and pigs, they're all the same as cows." He muttered like this, and then fell silent again. I must have been tired because I fell asleep still dressed in my outdoor clothes. Probably the doctor did that. Our clothes were taken off and placed under the blanket. I couldn't tell if he did it or not. I only realized it the next morning when I woke up. The next morning, I woke up groggily to find the doctor already awake. He saw me wake up and said, "Si." So I replied, "Yes." Japanese won't eat it either. What do you mean? Japanese won't eat XX bread. They even drink bathwater, but probably not. I like pork, but I can't eat dog meat. Do you enjoy dog meat? I think it's the king of meat. I thought so. He sighed and then fell silent. From that moment on, the doctor didn't mention the XX bread again. After returning home, the doctor continued his research on the relationship between electrons and atoms, so who knows when there will be some invention or discovery in that field. And this time, I sincerely hope that this research, unlike the previous one on XX bread, does not end in failure. This is the story that C told me, detailing how Dr. K's research shifted from success to failure and what led the doctor to change his mind. Published in 1929.